Okay, picture this for a second. Your apartment building is on fire. Alarms are blaring, but the firefighters, they're only yelling warnings at, like, 2 or 3 apartments over and over again.
While other people in the building have no clue what's happening.
Exactly. Total silence for them. Well, it's a really stark image, and it kind of sets the stage for what we're digging into today.
It really does. We're doing a deep dive today into how evangelistic efforts, the resources of the people, are actually spread out right now within Christianity.
Yeah, and our mission here, looking at some, frankly, quite challenging analysis, is to really get our heads around this idea of prioritizing the unreached. Why is there this big push to shift focus?
What does that even look like in practice?
Right.
Well, the main argument that keeps coming up in the sources is this pretty significant misallocation of resources.
Misallocation? How so?
The point being made is that a huge amount of Christian outreach, time, money, effort, it's aimed at people and places where the Christian message is already quite well known.
You mean people who've probably heard it before, maybe multiple times?
Exactly, like those firefighters just shouting at the same few doors.
Okay.
Meanwhile, you've got vast numbers of people, often grouped together as unreached people groups, who haven't really had even one clear chance to hear that message.
Not even once.
And the sources use some really interesting real-world analogies to help illustrate this.
Okay, like what?
Well, think about military strategy. Say, World War II. When the Allies landed in Normandy, they didn't just, secure the beach and stop.
No, of course not. They had to keep going.
Right. They pushed inland. They advanced strategically to take more ground, liberate more areas. The goal wasn't just to hold the entry point.
Okay, I see the parallel. They moved towards where they weren't, not just reinforcing where they already were.
Precisely. Or think about building hospitals. If a region needs a new hospital, where does it usually get built?
Well, you put it somewhere people don't have good access to health care.
Right.
An underserved area.
Exactly. You wouldn't typically build it right next door to a big existing hospital. The whole point is to broaden access for those who lack it.
Yeah, that seems obvious when you put it like that. 2 hospitals side by side when another whole area has nothing. It wouldn't make sense.
And it's a similar logic with, say, building schools. New schools tend to be prioritized for areas where kids don't currently have access to education.
Not just adding more options in a town that already has plenty of schools.
Right. It's about reaching those who currently have no access.
So, okay. This principle of prioritizing need, prioritizing the unreached or underserved, seems pretty standard in lots of other important areas. Why might it be different when it comes to sharing a message, like the gospel?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And one source brings in research from a missiologist, Justin Long, and his findings are, well, they're pretty eye-opening.
Oh, yeah. What did he find?
He calculated that globally there are actually enough resources, enough sort of evangelistic activity happening, that potentially every single person on Earth could hear about a 1-hour gospel presentation every other day.
Wait, what? Every other day for everyone. That's incredible. So it's not a lack of resources.
Yeah.
Not really.
That's the staggering part. It's not a shortage of activity overall.
Wow.
What Long's research really highlights is that most of this activity, this evangelistic energy, it's concentrated within communities that are already Christian.
So it's like we have enough alarms, enough warnings, but they're mostly sounding where people have already heard them.
That's a good way to put it. The problem isn't the volume, it's the distribution. The vast majority is aimed internally, you could say, rather than externally towards those with no exposure.
Okay, that paints a very different picture. It's an issue of focus.
Exactly. And this whole concern, this isn't actually a brand new idea in Christian circles. The sources point back to a really key moment in 1974.
74. What happened then?
It was the Lausanne Congress on World Evangelization. A major global gathering. Billy Graham was involved in getting it started. It brought together evangelical leaders from all sorts of backgrounds all over the world.
Must have been quite something. Different perspectives coming together. What came out of it?
A key outcome was the Lausanne Covenant. It's a document outlining shared commitments. And there's a section called the urgency of the evangelistic task.
Okay.
And in that section, they wrote this, I'm quoting directly here, "We are convinced that this is the time for churches and parachurch agencies to pray earnestly for the salvation of the unreached and to launch new efforts to achieve world evangelization."
Pray and launch new efforts for the unreached.
Okay.
Oh.
And then this crucial part. A reduction of foreign missionaries and money in an evangelized country may sometimes be necessary.
A reduction,
May
wow.
sometimes be necessary to facilitate the national church's growth in self-reliance and to release resources for unevangelized areas.
Release resources for unevangelized areas. That really stands out. So even back then, nearly 50 years ago, they saw this need to potentially shift resources away from areas already reached.
Mm.
Quick question, parachurch agencies, what exactly does that mean?
Oh, right. Good question. Basically, those are Christian organizations that aren't part of one specific denomination or local church. They often specialize in certain things like campus ministries or mission aviation or Bible translation, working alongside churches.
Got it. So this statement from Lausanne, it wasn't just churches, but these other groups too, recognizing this need for strategic redirection.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And the source we're looking at suggests this Lausanne statement could, or maybe should, be seen as a kind of core principle for mission work today.
A guiding value.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It hits both points. The urgency of reaching the unreached and the need to potentially rethink how resources are used in places where the gospel is already established.
So if the research, like Long's, suggests the issue isn't purely a lack of money, especially, say, in the West, what is the biggest need, according to the sources?
The argument being made is that the primary need isn't necessarily more cash in those already reached contexts.
Okay.
What's really needed, the sources argue, are obedient disciples of Jesus with vision, people ready to be world changers.
Vision, obedient disciples, so it's more about people.
Yes, a call for workers, for missionaries willing to actually go and share the message where it hasn't been heard. And just as importantly, a call for prayer warriors, people dedicated to praying for this specific task.
So it's a call for personnel, for feet on the ground, and for spiritual support behind them. A very active, intentional kind of engagement.
Precisely. That's the consistent thread running through these sources, the sheer urgency of reprioritizing. The global church, the body of Christ, needs to make a conscious, urgent shift towards reaching those who currently have minimal or zero access to the gospel message.
Okay, urgent reprioritization. But how do you even figure out who that is? Which countries, which groups are the most unreached or the neediest in this sense?
Well, one source mentions a pretty major study that aimed to do just that. They analyzed data from, get this, almost 16,000 different people groups.
16,000, wow.
Yeah, across 222 countries, trying to map out the current state of Christianity and, crucially, identify those with the least opportunity to hear the gospel.
How would they measure that opportunity?
Typically, studies like this look at factors like, is there a viable indigenous church within that people group? Do they have the Bible in their own language? Are there active efforts happening to share the gospel with them? Things like that. It's about assessing existing access.
Okay, so it's quite data-driven.
Very much so. And this big study resulted in what the source calls a great commission-oriented prioritization of countries.
A prioritization list, essentially.
Sort of, yeah, based specifically on people's access to the gospel. While we can't see the chart or figure they mention, the idea is that this kind of analysis provides a tool.
A tool for who?
For churches, for mission agencies, even for individuals thinking about how to get involved. It helps make more informed decisions about where the need for initial access is greatest.
So it helps shift from maybe just supporting traditional mission fields to looking strategically at where the gospel literally isn't yet.
Exactly. Moving beyond just habit or history to focus on the current reality of gospel access.
So just like you wouldn't pour all the medical aid into one city that's already well served, the argument is we shouldn't keep knocking on the same door spiritually, when entire communities next door haven't even heard there is a door.
That really captures the core message. This deep dive, looking at these sources, it points to this really strong, consistent call. We need to shift focus intentionally, strategically,
from primarily engaging the already reached
to purposefully engaging the unreached.
Yeah.
Driven by urgency and by the realization that we actually have the resources, they're just not pointed in the right direction right now.
Okay. So, thinking back to that burning building analogy, knowing that some people haven't even heard the first alarm, how does this shift your perspective on global outreach? It really forces you to think, doesn't it, about where the collective energy is going?
It absolutely does. You start to question the status quo. It makes you consider the real-world implications of this uneven distribution. What could happen if there was a conscious, widespread reprioritization?
Yeah. What would that look like?
If we truly believe the message is vital, then making sure everyone gets a genuine opportunity to hear it, Well, that becomes a really central issue.
Maybe.
Yeah.
Maybe the most profound act of neighborly love really is extending that warning, extending that message to those who don't even know there's a fire.